last name ever, first name greatest. Like a sprained ankle, boy, ain't nothing to play with. Started off local, but thanks to all the haters, I know G4.
Alright, you guys, so this is the first time actually doing this at the beginning of one of our podcast episodes. This was an episode featuring a good friend of mine and Matt's. His name's Mathew Koder. He's a friend of BURZACOTT's from back in high school, went to the same high school as each other, and grew up knowing each other for a long time, although they didn't connect on a deep level until later in life. In this episode, you're going to have to sit down, buckle in, and be ready for a very well articulated but very painful story of Mathew Koder's life and what has brought him to the place that he is now. And so you know who he is. He is a yogi, self-described, and we would all recognize him after having gotten to know him for the previous week, seeing him in person. He is a genuine article, and he lives his practice, and what has brought him to the place where he can do that and speak from his own truth in doing it, and the value that he sees in it, and the value that he sees that can be brought to everyone else that can start to practice it. It's self-evident when you actually listen to this episode from start to finish exactly what kind of person he is and how he landed at a place that it was the natural consequence that his life would follow this path. I would encourage anyone that's going to listen to this to really take the time, let yourself listen to this without too much distraction, and allow yourself to just go through the emotion with the three of us as we sit here and listen to Matt unpack some of his childhood traumas, some of the things that went into his family, and the issues that brought him those childhood traumas, and how he dealt with a lot of the things that happened over the course of his young life. And then lead us out to the end of the podcast where we brought it all together and how it all applies a little bit more specifically into the bodybuilding world, which is really the reason why we had him on the show in the first place. So, needless to say, how this episode went was a little bit of a surprise to all of us, and I think even Mathew Koder himself. So he wasn't expecting to let it all fly out there like that, but I'm very glad, and all of us are, that he did. And I think there's more to be gained from listening to this than probably any other podcast that we've put out up to this point. So although this isn't going to be filled with the content that you're likely drawn to the show for, I would strongly encourage all of you to give it a chance and listen to his story and see what of his story you can identify with, so that you can take some life lessons and some things away from this so you can self-reflect and see where you are in your own life. And especially if you're struggling personally with whatever part of your life is difficult for you and whatever aspect of it that you're trying to fight right now, take away from him and his story what may be useful to you, and at least just knowing that there is a way out and there's a way to come out of it. Even the most difficult suffering and pain that someone could endure, there's another way out, and it's not to end it. So, back to it now. Why don't you talk about your story and exactly how it landed you where you are?
Yeah, okay, so how I'm here and how I even got to yoga, because a lot of times as I look at it, I really do feel like if you look at me and once I share my life story, I think what it baffles me all the time is I shouldn't be the yoga guy. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm not the guy you look at and go, oh yeah, he's the yoga guy. Or once you hear my life story, you would more or less think that I should either be dead or in prison. And I know that a lot of times that's a thing that people say. It's played out a lot. Yeah. But I am quite literally on... my life experience was lived quite literally in all of the worst statistical averages that could happen. So I was born June 9th, 1986 to two very young parents. My parents were 17 and 15 when they got pregnant. But a really common theme we hear today is the discussion of generational trauma. Mm-hmm. And so my parents, like, my grandfather was this... I come from like a a land of giants. Like my genetic line, and Matt saw my dad. Like my dad looks
like a strong man.
He's a mammoth. Like he's 350 pounds, easy, and carries it around effortlessly. He's single-handedly one of the strongest human beings I've ever experienced in my entire life, ever, hands down. And he's a mammoth even after some of these things that I'm going to share with you. And all of my uncles are like 6'3", 6'4", 235, 245. My grandfather was 6'4", 250. Big burly German dudes that just had that natural genetic strength. Mm-hmm. But my grandfather also had just crazy mental, emotional problems that was always perpetually expressed as anger. And he was extraordinarily abusive to his children. To the degree that when I go back to the hometown that my dad was born in, when people find out that I'm my grandfather's grandson, they go, "That was the meanest son of a bitch I ever met." That's how he's known universally in the town. And so my dad had a series of experiences as a child that ultimately left him with some pretty severe mental, emotional trauma that drove him to athletics. He had accidentally shot and killed his best friend in a hunting accident. He worked on a game preserve, and it was common for these young boys back then to just, to go out and hunt, and they would take local businessmen out on hunting trips, and then in their free time they'd go run around the farm and hunt quail and then clean pheasant or whatever. Mm-hmm. But they were in a hunting accident, and his best friend was shot and killed when he was very, very young. And as you could imagine, as a young boy, shooting and killing your best friend and then sitting there with him while he bleeds out for an hour would be an extremely emotionally traumatic event. Mm-hmm. Now, rather than going home and getting the kind of love and support that you would hope to receive from a father and mother, they just fucking completely did the opposite and punished him relentlessly. His grandfather, my grandfather, his father, beat the shit out of him relentlessly. And this was not the only time. It was a regular occurrence to where my grandfather would beat him so badly that he couldn't go to school for weeks because he would be literally purple and blue. And this is where my father's, what he calls his inner defiance, was born. Because my grandpa, as a grown man, would beat him like a man as a child, and he became so enraged at being beaten and powerless that he said, this rage grew in him, and he's like, "I'll fucking show you one day when I'm bigger." And so then he became obsessed with running in nature. Like, he'd feel that, that pain in your body when you run and your lungs hurt and everything in your body says quit.
Exactly why I don't run.
He would associate that feeling as the same and similar pain that he would endure when he would be beaten. And then he'd want to conquer that pain. He'd be like, "I'm not fucking stopping. Mm-hmm. You're not telling me to stop. I decide what happens," was his feeling. Yeah. And that drove him to excel in athletics like incredible. Mm-hmm. And like my dad, when he was in high school, his next best friend died of leukemia. And then very shortly after that, he was in a car accident where the gentleman who was driving hit and killed an entire family. And so he had all of this emotional trauma that was being stacked in his system while enduring this incredible abuse at home with his dad, and his only outlet was fitness. And so what he would do is he would take that rage and he would bottle it up and he'd release it in the gym, and then he'd release it on the football field. And he was a running back. And when I talk to guys that played during his time, they're like, "Your dad would just run dudes over. And they just wouldn't even want to play." Because he had all of this rage in his system, and he'd just release it out on the field. And this was back when they didn't have the kind of culture in football
pussy down football now.
Yes. I mean, dude, these dudes were just, and I showed you guys a couple of, you haven't seen the pictures yet, but I showed you pictures of my dad. You even said he looked like some.
Brian Bosworth, for anybody watching, he just looked like the typical early 90s jacked chiseled jaw, hair, like belly shirt, abs. She's like a big bad. If you've seen the movie The Program, which you probably haven't seen either. Fuck. Yeah.
So my dad had all this emotional trauma and a neglectful, and so he didn't have a healthy relationship with his father. And so the story I get from my dad was that he met my mom at a kegger. I haven't ever gotten the full story from my mom where they met, and I don't know if that has to do with like maybe the shame of getting pregnant at a kegger, so I don't really know the full story.
Could be.
But from what I understand was that they met at a kegger out, partying, and they had sex and got pregnant. And then he wanted to try to do the right thing and get together with her on a more permanent basis because she was pregnant with me. But they were 17 and 15 when this happened. Mm-hmm. And my mom, her dad walked out on her and her mom when she was just an infant. And her mom resented her with such seething hatred because she associated the daughter with the dad and all of everything that comes along with having a kid and having a husband who walked out on her, that she was incredibly emotionally and physically abusive to my mom. And so by time their kids who are having sex, they're kind of having, I imagine that what is happening is that they're trying to solace this deep emotional pain that they're experiencing through connection with each other. Mm-hmm. And then so like I was born out of pain. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Like literally it was pain that sowed the seeds of my conception there. And so my dad tells me that my mom was doing drugs during the pregnancy, and this is why I was premature and her body rejected me. And so I was premature. I was several months premature, and I was in the neonatal NICU for several weeks. And then after that, because my parents are young parents, they did not come from wealthy parents either. Like they were coming from, I don't know, maybe run-of-the-mill American parents that were trying to do the best that they could on the incomes that they had. And then back then the culture was different too. It was kind of a cut your kids loose and let them fend for yourself kind of a thing once they got to a certain age. And
yep.
So, and back then the drinking age was only like 19. The culture of my family was really interesting too. Like my grandfather, just as an example, took me to a park once, and this kid was bullying me, and he was punching me and all this other stuff. And my grandfather, it said, "You're going to go over there and punch that kid, or we're not leaving." And so he refused, and I didn't want to. And I cried, and I asked to not do it. And he refused to let me leave until I went over and punched the kid who was bullying me. And so it was this violence sewed the fabric of the environment. That was how they solved things. You got a problem, you fight about it. Anybody's got a problem anywhere that you're in, you fight about it. And so growing up, like I would be I had, my parents were young. The drinking age is 19. They're 18 and 16 now that they're having me. They're literal children.
Yep.
But they're children with deep emotional wounds that they haven't been able to address.
Yep.
So then they're having interrelationship conflict that's coming out between them. Mm-hmm. And then my dad, because he has all of this trauma buried in his system, he's at this time, never to me, he's a gentle giant with me. But if you were a man and you did even anything to touch his territory, he was going to inflict so much pain on you that you never wanted to do that again. Mm-hmm. To the degree that I've seen my dad nearly beat to death multiple men. In fact, one time I was certain that he beat the man to death. Like, beat him to death. I thought he beat him to death in front of me. And these things at that age, they're very difficult to process what's taking place. And the contrast of those experiences are hard to interpret too. He would be with me. And then interestingly enough, though, on one level, I would feel incredibly safe with him because I never saw a man that could even come close to testing him physically. Mm-hmm. Not even close. Yep. Because he had so much pain on the inside that it didn't matter how much pain you attempted to inflict on him physically. He would just barrel through it like nothing. Yep. And just keep going. And so I always felt incredibly safe with him because the energy that he had with me was always loving, but the energy that he had with other people was like, if you cross me, you will die. And my mom would wield my dad's power like a pit bull. She would like manipulate situations and stuff, like, because she wanted my dad's attention ultimately, but my dad was kind of hurt and broken, trying to find his place as a young man, you know, like when we're 18, 19, trying to find out where you're going to be. He was getting scholarships out the wazoo to different colleges, but he kind of threw away his future because now he had this kid he thought he needed to provide for me. So now all of a sudden he's working on grain elevators, not like the sexiest job in the world. Like, he's a laborer. He's welding on grain elevators and unloading grain out of train cars all day, and building the grain structures that they hold them in, the silos and all of that other stuff. So he's a very hard worker. All my uncles are very hard. They're very hard-working guys, and so at the end of the day, they'd all want to go to the bar and drink, and then they'd all go to the bar and they'd drink, and then they'd all fight. They'd fight. That's what they did. And my mom hated that my dad would like to go to the bar sometimes after work and get in these altercations. And sometimes, like, I remember one time when I was a kid, some guy hit him in the face with a bat and ripped his jaw off his face, and that should have knocked him out. But he literally stood there, reattached his own jaw, looked over at my mom and says, "He got me a good one, didn't he, babe?" And then they had to rush him to the hospital where he had to have his jaw wired shut after this guy cracked him in the face. It ripped his jaw off his face. He got hit with the bat so hard. And then his mouth was wired shut for several weeks after that. But his rage was so intense. Like, one time, and to this day, man, like, it blew my mind. When I was a kid, he worked for this place called Cargill in Des Moines, Iowa. And what would happen is the trains would bring in the feed that would then be sold to like farmers to feed their cattle. But you had to unload the feed from the train car. And they would sit on this conveyor belt and they'd pull them down this track that was about maybe 300, 400 yards long with like a big, you know, industrial sized chain that would pull that whole car down, and then it would pull it back and offload it to another track. Well, that conveyor belt broke one night, and he didn't want to work overtime. So he went outside and pushed full train cars full of grain by hand, like he was pushing a lineman, and then would stop them. It was the most incredible feat of strength that I ever saw, especially as I got older and I started watching strongman, and I would watch those guys pull the train car with their whole legs on the rope and everything. To this day, it blows my mind. I can't even believe the power. He used to bench, when I was 2, 3, 4 years old, though, he taught me how to bench press, taught me how to deadlift, would do sprint medleys with me, because he did all that stuff in high school. Pole vaulted, wrestled, played basketball, everything. So that was how we connected, was through athletics. And we also connected through this idea of pushing through pain. Mm-hmm. He would say to me all the time as a boy, he'd say, "Son, lift till you cry, pump till you die." And he embedded within my system that desire for inner defiance. He would say to me all the time, he'd go, "You never let another man dominate you." That was part of those fatherly lessons, right? Mm-hmm. But because of those complexities of young relationships and pregnancies and all that stuff, my parents, they couldn't stay together. And at this time in the 80s, methamphetamines is a really popular party drug, and I don't believe that in rural communities they understood the impact or long-term effects of methamphetamines at the time. I think that they were just young kids wanting to party, wanting to take the edge off of all of the pain in their heart, but still very hopeful for a bright future, mm-hmm. right? But they have some traumas in their heart that is affecting the way in which they encounter each other. My mom is wielding my dad like this vicious pit bull and doing all this kind of, emotionally manipulative stuff that sometimes women do in order to get men to yield to their desires, making him jealous, talking to other dudes. And then and that's causing problems. That's causing fights in the home. And all of this stuff is hard to sit with emotionally when you're a child. You don't understand it.
Yep.
And so then on top of that, they would start, at different times they would do drugs, or my dad would take me over to my aunt's house, and they were doing methamphetamines over at my aunt's house, and they'd all go upstairs into this upstairs bedroom and leave us kids down there for hours, and you'd see it, like they'd have one state going in and a different state coming out, and this was a constant, like basically a perpetual state of constant instability and questioning whether or not you were going to be safe in a situation. And because of the environment that my dad was around, he also had all these, I call them like roughneck friends. So if he needed to go get dope from somebody, I might be out in the very middle of a fucking cornfield somewhere at a shitty trailer in 1991 Iowa that it literally looks like something out of a horror movie, with two giant Cujo looking dogs barking at the car while he's inside getting drugs and I'm outside. And I think at the time that, like, again, like I said, I do think that they were just wanting to party, and then the partying, the drug hooked them, right? And then now all of that energy is being accentuated. They're trying to heal, though, and all this time, like, they're trying to do well, but they just don't know what to do. They have all of this inner culture. And then they get pregnant and have my little brother. My brother's 5 years younger than me. And he's a huge cornerstone for my life and why I'm even alive, because he gave me something to live for. And so in 1997, this whole thing with my parents, actually, let me backtrack. We moved all the time. My mom never really could hold down a job. And so, like, we would often not have money for food or not have money for, like, our rent or our lights or stuff. So it was not uncommon for us to can hunt as a family in order to get a box of macaroni and cheese or a packet of hot dogs or a packet of bologna. And then we would have fried bologna sandwiches and macaroni and cheese for dinners. And so, like, I remember can hunting with my family in order to get enough money for food. And then on top of that, like, my mom would bawl in hysteria over going to the mailbox because of a bill coming. It would cause so much pain for her because she knew she didn't have the money to pay it, and she knew pretty soon somebody was going to come and knock on the door, and it was going to kick her and her two boys out on the street and into the cold, and she didn't know what to do. She didn't know how to do it. And so for many years of my life, I was afraid to go to the mailbox because as a child, I started associating the mailbox with pain. So much so that at the age of 6 years old, I stole all of the mail in an apartment complex that I lived in, everybody's mail. And I took it and buried it because I didn't want anybody in the apartment complex to be in pain. And I did this for like 3 weeks until they found out that the neighbor kid's stealing all the mail. Now, my heart was in the right place, right?
Yeah.
Then so I'm moving and I don't have any friends. So at home is a kind of a torture, and I don't have any friends at school. Mm-hmm. And I had some issues with school because when I was in kindergarten, my teacher, I was left-handed originally. Mm-hmm. And they hated that I was left-handed. And I also spell my name with one T. And so they insisted to me that I was spelling my name wrong. And I was like, no, I'm not spelling my name wrong. My name's spelled with one T. And so they would take my pencil and they would put the pencil in between my little tiny fingers, and then they would fucking squeeze my hand and leave those little marks and bruise my little hand because they'd squeeze my hand so hard. And then they forced me to write my name with two T's. And they even, because I wouldn't, they stopped letting me go out for recess. They actually took my whole recess away from me for like a semester as a kindergartner, which as a kindergartner is like, it was so traumatic for me that they would literally pin me in a corner and not let me go out and play with anybody. And I couldn't understand why it was so bad for me that I just wanted to write with my left hand and write my name with one T. Yeah. And I thought I was going to be in trouble when I went home, so I never told my parents about it. And so then I spelled my name wrong, my own name wrong, until I was a senior in high school because that traumatized me so badly. Because the loss of the ability to go be in play, broke my heart so bad in in kindergarten. And so these were experiences that I was having with education that laid like my foundational perception of authority, my foundational perception of my teachers. So I could never connect to a teacher unless I felt genuine kindness from them. Because if I felt anything other than kindness from them, I was like, fuck you. I'm not learning from you at all. I don't give a shit.
Yep.
Right? And then I was moving all of the time, and I could never make friends, because when you're the new kid in school, you're either loved by everybody or you're hated. It's typically never one or the other. And it just so happened, I just felt like I was always on the receiving end of the hatred, partly because I was a little socially awkward. They put me in special ed classes too, because I would disengage with education so much that they were saying he's behind. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And this was just making me hate school. That's all it was doing.
Yep.
And then in 1997, my dad was in a head-on collision that was so terrible that he was dead on the side of a road in a body bag for several hours. And then life flight EMT, which is where they fly the helicopters into a severe wreck, and the people that are severely wounded are flown back to the nearest hospital. A life flight unit arrived on scene, and the EMT was checking the body bag for identification, just so they could notify the family. To this day, we have no idea. Like, did you see him move or something, or what happened? But apparently, he saw signs of life and started to work on resuscitative measures right there in the body bag, and they life flighted him from the scene all the way to our local hospital in Des Moines, Methodist Hospital. There he was in intensive care unit. I can't remember, it felt like months, but I know he was in the hospital for a very long time. He was in a coma. His lungs were collapsed. It crushed in his face, shattered his jaw, shattered his pelvis, and gave him a frontal lobe brain injury. And I don't know for anybody listening who knows much about frontal lobe brain injuries, but they're one of the worst type of brain injuries that a human being can have. And it was my first experience with understanding that personality was pliable.
It's all right, man. It's okay.
Because I remember my dad being Superman. And then when he came out, he wasn't Superman anymore. He was totally different. It took everything from him. And I had to watch him relearn how to walk and how to talk, how to write his ABCs, how to read, I watched his mind struggle to make sense of reality. Like, he would take these fucking news clippings and cut them out, paste them on a locker, and try to make sense of his life. I'd watch him look at me and not know how to connect to me, not know how to love me. And I was like, Dad, where did you go? Mm-hmm. And I felt for a long time at that time that I lost my hero, because every little boy's dad is his hero, and my dad especially, because he loved me so intensely that every time he was with me, it was like he was my coach. He was teaching me, like I felt him as my first coach. He was teaching me how to weightlift, how to deadlift, how to run, and he wanted me to be my best like him. And then all of a sudden, it was gone. And I couldn't turn and lean on his strength anymore. And I didn't have any strength of my own because I'm just a kid. And we moved to this small town in Iowa called Altoona, and I thought maybe this might be a chance at a new life. But we moved into a part of this town where if you're low income, like you're on food stamps or any of the social welfare, this is where you go. So then when everybody's in that environment, all of the problems with social welfare and all of that stuff is apparent. We didn't even have enough money to have our own place. We had to live with my aunt. We slept on her floor. And we didn't have any money for clothes or anything like that. So I always went to school basically. And my mom kept our clothes clean and did the best. But, kids notice that shit, so they make fun of you kind of relentlessly and all the time. So I got bullied a lot in elementary, and my grandpa told me to punch the kids who bully me.
Yeah.
So what am I doing all the time? I'm fighting motherfuckers. I remember, dude, I fought Bryce Keister on the elementary playground, so much so that he remembered it for the ensuing years after. He's like, remember that time you kicked my ass on the playground? Right? And but fighting even at such a young age was so opposite of my heart. Like, I never wanted to hurt anyone, but I felt like I had to. And I didn't know another way to get people to, one, be my friend or to respect my boundaries. So I would rather play knockout with y'all than have you guys not like me. I want to play with you, you know? And, but that wasn't the experience that I had. So then naturally I kind of started fitting in with what you might consider more of the outcast crowd. And then I would show signs of promise with my intelligence, because most people wouldn't know that when I would go home at the end of the day, a lot of times I would just sit down and hand copy anatomy books, because I have had a life. I just had this in me to love anatomy. I don't know. I don't even know where it comes from. But my grandma, my great-grandma, before she passed away, she always used to love to tell this story. She said that one time when I was about 4 or 5 years old, she went to go take a plate of bones from a set of pork chops away from me. And I said, no, Grandma, leave it, because I want to study the bones. And so I've just had this in me for anatomy my whole life. And then, you know, I'm growing up, junior high, but my mom is struggling with her addictions and with managing her emotions. She doesn't know how. She can't stabilize emotionally long enough to get a job and sustain it. And so then she goes to doctors for help, and rather than fucking giving her real help, what do? They prescribe her Xanax, or they prescribe her some fucking whack-ass other drug. And all these things just completely ruined her psychically. I could tell the moment, and Xanax just hooked her. So then from that point forward, she was either smoking weed, taking Xanax, or drinking alcohol. All my other aunts all smoke weed, take Xanax, drink alcohol, and do methamphetamines. So this is all I know growing up as a kid, is dysfunction and disruption. So by the time I'm in high school, I'm so kind of fucked from the floor up that, like, I'm a freshman and I'm in fucking health class, and I look over at Matt BURZACOTT, and Matt BURZACOTT looks like everything I'm not. And his life looks like everything I'm not. And I can't even imagine what that life is like. And it feels like looking at fucking Shangri-La while you're standing in hell and you don't even know how to get there. And I would think to myself, I'd be like, dude, there's no way that Matt BURZACOTT would want to be my friend. There's no way. That's what I believed, because everything around my environment told me that I was nothing. Less than nothing. None of my teachers cared. I couldn't even talk about what was going on with anybody, because nobody understood. Nobody could understand what it would be like to watch fucking junkies get doped out of their mind and not even know what universe they're in. You know, and so go to school tomorrow,
Right.
Tell me to do algebra.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
I'm not going to do that.
Yep.
And so then they finally said, hey, listen, you got to get the fuck out of here. You can't stay in the school because you're the troubled kid. And I was like, yeah, you're damn right. Kick me the fuck out. I don't want to be here anyways. And so they sent me to an alternative school. And there I actually connected with teachers that cared about me. And I went from being a DNF student to being a straight A student. And I was awarded a scholarship. And at this time, what I had was a perception to understand that what was happening around me was not how life was supposed to be. Mm-hmm. I didn't know how it should be, but I knew that this wasn't how it was supposed to be. So then I started trying to figure out how to make myself confident. Well, the guys that I want to be like, they look nice and clean. So I'm just going through this natural evolution of trying to how to make myself feel confident. And so I don't have any like nice clothes, so I get a job working at a clothing store. Mm-hmm. And then it's this clothing store called The Buckle. And I would spend all my money on clothes, and then I would, you know, and the clothes would genuinely make me feel better. And that was some of my first experiences with recognizing that how I carried myself, my hygiene, like how I took care of myself, actually impacted me emotionally and mentally. Because I was genuinely happier in my heart and more of sound mind when I had my teeth brushed, clean set of clothes, my hair cut, all that other stuff. And I was recruited out of the Marines at 17 years old, out of this place called The Buckle. And I went from this basically like dysfunction. Nobody really has standards. People go to bed whenever, they eat whatever whenever, to like rigid discipline and strict standards. And I went into that experience wanting to be different. So I told myself that I was just going to Forrest Gump the experience, you know, whatever they told me to do. I wish that was going to be the end, you know, that it was going to be a happily ever after story after that, but it wasn't. When I came back home, this guy who my mom had dated had went to prison for something. I don't remember what. But when he came back, I knew he was a bad guy. Like, a lot of people that don't grow up where I grow up, like, they glorify violence and they glorify this tough guy attitude because they've never really lived the consequences of violence. They've never seen people get limbs cut off over a few $100s worth of drug money, or seen where violence can lead and what a truly violent person looks like and feels like, or the level of dysfunction that has to exist within them in order to even act like that.
Yep.
And so this guy shows up and somehow, you know, gets into conversation with my mom, as far as I could understand, that he's like basically promising her he's changed. He's not that guy anymore. Whoop-de-whoop-de-whoop. The same prison story, right? Well, she's been on her own. My dad has a brain injury. She's got kids. She's been desperate to try to find a way out. So I think she thought maybe he was different. But she's never really at this point addressed her own internal mental, emotional trauma. Mm-hmm. So she's still taking Xanax. She's still smoking weed. She's still drinking. She doesn't have a job. She's on social welfare. And she's got to play the welfare game all the time. And so I think she thought at this time, like, maybe this would be some welcomed relief. And this guy, though, came into the picture and got my mom almost immediately hooked again on methamphetamines. And they started running around like two fucking teenagers on a big old fuck bender. And they'd run around and just have sex and do all this other stuff and like neglect the shit out of my younger brother. And so when I got off the plane from basic training, I had a couple guys from my unit tell me that I was getting deployed to Iraq. This was during Operation Iraqi Freedom and like the tip of the insurgency. And I'm 17 years old, you know, like that's a heavy fucking thing to wrap your head around. And then I go home and my mom was 160 pounds when I left, and she's 96 pounds now and fucking like head first into a deep relapse on methamphetamines. And my brother, who is like, he was my only friend, was my brother. You know, like I didn't have like friends at school. Well, he was the only friend at that level. I had started to formulate a couple of friends for sure who would become friends for life, but we had brotherly connection that only we could connect to because of the experiences that we were going through. And so I go back to the Marines and I'm trying to figure out something to do with my brother, because at this time I don't feel like I can go to war emotionally while my brother has this going on, because he's only 12 years old and I'm all he has. If it's not me, he has nobody.
Yeah.
And so then I basically, from all of my leadership, from my direct command on up, get told, fuck you, we don't care. And that triggered within me a trauma from school. Yep. And at that moment, I associated everything with the Marine Corps as being a lie and being just nothing but deception. And all of my inner hurt and rage got directed at them. And I was like, fuck you, I will not go die for you. You lied to me, was what I felt. I felt like completely betrayed, that they were no different than any of the people that I'd ever grown up around. So I started to refuse to train. And when I refused to train, they threw me into a mental health unit and tortured me for like 4 or 5 weeks. Literally tortured me before they shipped me home and proceeded to shame me intensely. I'm not even 18. And I thought I had thrown my whole life away, too, because I wanted to be a cop. My heart has always been oriented towards service. I loved them. My first words were G.I. Joe. My first words were G.I. Joe. Because I've just had this natural sensitivity to the life around me, and I think partly due to how I grew up, this desire to eliminate pain. And so I come home, I think my life is fucking thrown away. And of course, everybody's talking. Everybody's talking about what it is, what it's not, what he is, coward, pussy, traitor, whoop-de-whoop-de-whoop, and I just slip into a massive depression. And then at this time, the only thing that can make me feel better is the pain of fighting and the pain of fucking, or the pleasure of fucking, and sometimes the pain, because the women that I would be with, well, they're dysfunctional, because they're the kind of women that let you fuck on the first night but don't really want any intimacy. You know what I'm saying? So I'm in this loop cycle of pain, but the core of me is still there. So,
Yeah.
and I don't know how to come out of what's going on. So I spend the next several years trying to navigate this incredible, deep sense of hopelessness, and the fact that I feel as though there's nothing on the horizon for my future, and I've been surrounded by pain. And then now I've got this huge, massive chip on my shoulder. So I'm trying to do the best that I can. My mom is using drugs. We're trying to recover a relationship, and I'm never losing hope that she can get clean, and that my dad's brain injury can heal, and that I can somehow come out of whatever's going on in my life, and maybe I could be a cop again. Maybe if somebody could hear me, they'd let me be a cop again. Maybe I could be a fireman. Maybe, right? But the whole time I'm terrified that people are just going to hear the story at surface value and go, well, fuck you, and they won't be able to see the whole picture. So I just feel crushed because my dream of being of service to a police officer just seems like it'll never happen. And so I get an apartment with a kid, and I'm not going to name any names, but I didn't get it was a duplex, and me and this kid was in and out of jail. And this is what I grew up around, though. So none of I don't even think twice about living with people that do drugs because this is what I know.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
And it's just the environment. And we were friends for a little bit, but I had enough good things instilled for me from my parents prior to my dad's car accident, and when he was of more sound mind. And I'd had a few really great teachers that I connected with along the way, and my drill instructors really, really, really brought out the best in me when I was 17 years old. And so already culturally, him and I are way different. I still make my bed pristine, clean my clothes, brush my teeth, high and tight haircut, clean and pressed clothes, everything. And he's just like a little kid trying to pretend to be a thug. And I'm over here trying to tell him all the time, dog, your fucking dad owns Denny's. Okay, you don't know this world, dude. You listen to Tupac and Tech Nine, and you fucking think that you're a G. And I'm gonna tell you right now, there ain't nothing sexy about this world. And I'm trying to save him from himself at this time, because I know he don't want to be in this world. But his dad keeps bailing him out of the trouble that he's in too, so he never has to really bear and feel the full brunt of his choices. Yeah. And I had nobody. So every time I have acted, it has been the full weight of the consequence has been on my shoulders, good or bad or in the middle. And that is my gift. That is my gift. And so we have a falling out, me and this kid. And at this time, within my inner culture is still a desire to be violent and to hurt, a desire to be violent, and I have a commitment to it. I'm used to it. And in fact, not only am I used to it, I want to hurt people that want to hurt me. I want it. I want a reason. Let me loose. Just give me a reason. I'm waiting. And that is not a good place to be in internally, because you're kind of perpetually a ticking time bomb, and you walk around on edge all the time waiting for something to happen. So my body was always geared up for war. So me and him are having a tit for tat. Well, he sees my mom one night really late at night at a local grocery store, and my mom's there. She's dating some new guy now, but this new guy was in prison, out from prison, who had an attempted murder charge brought down to a willful injury. So this is a bad dude. And the kid that was my former roommate, he's playing gangster. So he's in the Hy-Vee, and he starts talking shit to my mom, to people he shouldn't talk shit to, because these are people who don't got anything to lose. And my mom told him, she said, I'm not going to name any name, but she told she said, young man, you need to leave. And the guy goes, young man, I'm going to tell you right now, you need to shut your fucking mouth and you need to get out of here. Well, he thought he was white Tupac, and he didn't shut his mouth, and he followed him out to the car, and then he proceeded to talk shit, and the dude slit his throat ear to ear in the parking lot. Ear to ear. And was leaving in there to bleed out. The girls that the kid was with fucking went into a panic. They tried to rush him to a hospital. They rushed him to the hospital. He barely survived. But now I got people in the community that think that I put a hit out on this dude. And I'm like, no, I didn't. But this motherfucker was just dumb, talking shit to the wrong people at the wrong time. So now I got heat coming down on me all the time from motherfuckers that are like, okay, well, we're going to kill you. So I'm locked in a cycle of violence. Mm-hmm. And, well, when you're locked in a cycle of violence, you better learn how to fucking fight.
Yep.
So this is where, I'm training jiu-jitsu, I'm training MMA, I'm training again. I'm going back to kill mode. And in the Marines, they turn on the killer. Yep. And they don't tell you how to turn it off.
Yep.
And so this guy, from what I understand, I was jumped outside of a club, and they beat the shit out of me. And to this day, I'm surprised. I thought somebody was going to stick me. I can't even believe that I didn't catch a blade in the ribs or something, But I'm young, and I'm ready to rap, so I'm just but I'm catching fucking shots. Yeah. I mean, hard ones. And at one point in time, they put me down, and they fucking soccer kicked me in the face and boot my teeth through my lips. And I managed to get away, and now I feel like a bitch. Even though it was me, and I couldn't even tell you how many dudes, because it was just fucking boom, 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 just fucking fists and legs. I couldn't even tell you how many dudes. Maybe 3, maybe 5, maybe 10. Close your eyes and just start getting hit in the face, and however many you can imagine, that's what the experience was like. Yep. But I managed to get away, and then I hear through the rumor mill that a certain person put the hit out on me to try to have me killed. And I don't even think to do due diligence and see if any of this is actually true or not. I'm just young and emotional.
Right.
And it makes sense to me that this person would be the one to do it.
Yeah.
So I grab my fucking shotgun, and I fucking load up, and I drive to his house. And I knew what I was going to do. And there was nothing, at the time, there was nothing that was going to stop me. And when I got there, the house that he had been living in, he had moved out of. And it was the first time I felt like I had actually really felt an omen from whatever it is that we want to call the source of creation. And it was a full moon night. And I'm standing there with this fucking gun in my hand. And the realization that I about threw my life away forever is sinking into every cell in my body. Every cell in my body. And I'm like, oh my God. But I know I'm not strong enough to beat my inner urges. I'm not. So I can't have this around me. I cannot have this in my possession, because if it's in my possession, I'm going to kill someone. And I know it. I know I'm not strong enough emotionally to stop. So I had a friend who was a drug dealer who had 2 pit bulls that he fought. I drove over to his house, and the female pit ended up getting pregnant because he wanted to sell them to other dudes so that they could fight. And I said, hey, I know you want my weapon. I'll give it to you for pick of the litter. Because, and the reason this happened, because when I was standing there outside of that dude's house, I heard a voice. I heard a voice from everywhere and nowhere. It had no language, but it spoke in every language. And it spoke through every fucking cell in my body. And it said, you need to love something. But I didn't know how to love. I'd lost the skill of how to express my love. I'd shut everything in so far and buried it under such a hard shell, and buried it under so much pain that little boy that used to just want to go out and play and would ask, why is the sky blue? He was gone at this time. That guy was so buried down under a hardened shell that he was completely out of the picture. And he agreed. And so I would go over every day waiting for the pups to be born. And I remember the moment my dog came out, I knew that was the one. I don't know how I knew, but I just knew. And I would go over and I'd let him lay on my chest, and I'd just pet him, and I'd just practice. I would practice loving him. Even then, I'd just practice loving him, because it was a practice, and I would feel myself being congruent. Like I'd feel it in my heart, like I'd try to love, and all that would come out was hate. And then I'd set him down, and I'd go, no, I don't want to give that energy to him, you know. And finally, he gets to come home with me, and I name him Bear. His name was Bear. Which, how crazy is it that your dog is named Barry? Right? And we're both named Matt.
Yeah.
And so Bear would become my first spiritual teacher, because the love of a dog is so pure, and it's so innocent. And he was so strong, just like Barry. So I connected to him, and people were afraid of him. And so we connected on that level, because people were afraid of me. And I could pour my love into him and practice loving on him. But like, I had a lot of that I had to grow as a young man. A lot of character that needed to be changed about me. And because his love was so pure, it was a spotless mirror to the ugliness that was in me. And it was fucking nasty to have to see myself and see my own ugliness against the purity of his own love. And then also to have to face the reality of how fucking destitute my situation was. I have a fucking alternative high school degree. I have no parents, really. I mean, they're alive, but they're not really capable of providing me any actual assistance through this world. I'm a white male, so society already views me as being in the advantaged position, so nobody wants to give me an aid at all. And so I have no place to turn to. And I'm in the lowest possible fucking point. I have no way of knowing how to get out, but I'm not going to quit. I know that. I know I'm not quitting. And just somehow in me, I knew that if I just kept going, something better was going to come on the horizon. At least, and maybe that was just delusion at the time, you know, like I just had to keep going. What else was I going to do? So I get this job. There's a lot of shit that happens in between this that's equally as crazy. There's too much fucking craziness in my life to actually cover in this podcast, but I want to bring you to the point where I find yoga. Yeah. And why all of this is so significant and why I'm passionate about it.
Give us the most significant things that you feel that you need to say.
Is my life had gotten to a point. I was working this job at Wells Fargo. I'd managed to get a good job, and I was good at what I did, and there was a woman there who was my manager who single-handedly started to alter my perception of people. Because at this point, I think everybody's garbage. Everybody. I don't believe that there's a single good human on the planet. Everybody's just out to fucking get theirs. If they're nice to you, it's just a fugazi. You know, it's just a facade. They're just trying to be nice to you to get something. And so I've guarded my heart so intensely. There's just this massive wall up, right? And she would do so many kind things for me without the expectation of anything in return that she literally broke down the barrier of my heart. She knew I was hungry. She knew I wouldn't eat, and she knew I was too proud to ask anybody for food for two reasons. One, I didn't want anybody to know I was suffering. I was too ashamed to admit that I was in so much pain, and I was too afraid of what others might think of me if I actually told them how I really felt and what was really going on in me, and how alone and how scared and how helpless I felt. I mean, because that's not sexy. Mm-hmm. What chick is going to want to fuck a dude who has no money and like literally like, you don't get Christmas with me.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, we don't get to go to my family's country club and hang out and golf and go fucking eat a nice turkey dinner and, you know, go back and watch fucking some cool Christmas movie while everybody exchanges gifts and laughs at their sweaters. Right? So the only thing I can connect to is pain. So I go to the fucking gym. That's what I do. And I feel the weight of that bar. And you know what I loved about the gym? 135 pounds is always 135 pounds. It's honest and it's true and it's never a fucking lie. Mm-hmm. And I could never be anything different other than what I actually was at that day. If I was weak, the weight showed me. If I was strong, the weight showed me. If I was in a good mood, the weight showed me. If I was in a bad mood, the weight showed me. And so I just would go into there, and the pain of loading my body was better than facing the pain in my heart. Mm-hmm. And but I wanted to die. I did. Like, when life becomes so burdensome internally, and because of the things that I experienced, and like the torture that they literally put me through in the Marines, like, those things was causing me to have severe nightmares every night. I couldn't sleep without putting on, and it had to be specifically some kind of like Disney movie or comedy movie, because I knew once I went to sleep, I was going to have a nightmare, and I was going to need to wake up and hear something positive. Mm-hmm. And so this is going on. So I'm miserable during the day. I'm miserable at night, but I won't do any fucking drugs, because everybody that I know do drugs, and I'm associating doing drugs with weakness. Mm-hmm. Oh, you're too much of a bitch to face your heart. That's why you run to drugs. Mm-hmm. Oh, you're a fucking coward, really, because you don't. I'd rather sit here in my pain than run to booze. Mm-hmm. I'd rather sit here and just fucking eat it all day, because I can take it and you can't. And I had that vengeance in my heart. You know what I'm saying? Then I kept walking past this poster of these chicks in this yoga position. And they look like upper class white chicks that probably drove their husband's Mercedes to the gym and could do shitty fitness all day. And that's what I thought. I was like, yep. Of course it's easy to be happy when you got somebody footing all your bills. Somebody can fucking pay for you to like hop in your car, and all you got to do is wear fancy fitness clothes and stretch all day. Yep. So I hated looking at that picture because part of me was envious. I wanted somebody to buy me a Mercedes. Yeah. I wanted somebody to put me in fitness clothes and let me stretch all day and get me out of fucking working with convicts at Titan Tire. I was sick and tired of having to be violent in amongst violent people. Mm-hmm. I was tired of the load. And on the top of that, they were all hot as shit. And so I was like, dude, I would fuck every one of these girls. Every one of them at the same time. But I'm very angry at you because you probably have a nice life and I'm projecting my emotion outward. I didn't know that that's what I was doing at the time. I just had this dichotomous experience. Yeah. So it would fucking rub me every time I had to walk by it. Just rub me. Like a scratch where it just keeps scratching you, you know? Yep. And then all of a sudden, this guy gets murdered in my front yard. And I'm like, dude, I'm never going to get out of the fucking hood. And I'm just like, and right after the cops cleaned up the fucking load, there was a guy who used to pimp this girl on the back of his bicycle, and he used to ride her around on his pegs. And it was like the scene out of a fucking movie. Here comes this chick with her little tiny purse on the back of this pimp's bike, and he's just riding her up and down the road, and then she hops into a trick's car, and I'm like, dude, this is what I'm going to be stuck with. And in that moment, that voice spoke to me again. And it said, because I was thinking about, I was like, dude, tonight should be it. This is it. I should just go kill myself. I'm never going to be anything more. I'd convinced myself nothing was ever going to be anymore. I was stuck. No woman of real quality was going to want me. I was going to never have anything of value to offer. Let's just be done with it. And in that moment, that same voice that told me I needed to love something came back in to my life experience again. And in the same exact fashion, it said this to me. It said, if your best thinking could have produced your best life, you would have done it by now. And in that moment, I knew that it shook me. And then in that moment, I was like, well, holy fuck, what's wrong with my mind? And I lost all sense of trust in my mind. In that moment. And for some reason, I knew that I wasn't going to kill myself, but I knew that something was really fucking wrong with my mind, and it had everything to do with the way that I thought about life and not life itself. But I didn't know what all that meant. And my patterns were still way too strong and had way too strong of a grip for me to even make any sense of it. So I go to the gym to train, and then I'm going to go take this yoga class because the guy I was going to fight and spar with didn't show up. So I'm like, well, fuck it. I'll just go do this yoga thing. And then I'll get it out of my system and it'll be done. And I can go back to thinking that fitness is just the greatest thing ever because that's what I feel like at the time. And they take me through the experience. And first of all, the experience was awful. It was way harder than I thought it was ever going to be. Like, it was so fucking hard, like insanely hard. And then I watched these people like do effortless movements, and all my ego around like what I was doing with my fitness was just completely like shut down in that moment. And I was, but I had always been a guy, like when you fight and you do MMA or when you do particularly MMA, which is always MMA and jiu-jitsu, which is always funneled into my bodybuilding, you don't get good at jiu-jitsu with an ego. Like you get beat so often and so frequently, you have to come to the conclusion there's effective technique and ineffective technique. And the reason I'm losing is because my technique isn't effective. And so this dude choked me unconscious because I suck. Genuinely. Yep. And the only way that I'm going to stop this from happening is if I get better. And so I get in and I know that something's really wrong with my technique. I'm like, there's a huge hole in my game. It'd be like if you had, it was like the first time in the UFC when they fought and Hoist Gracie beat everybody because he had jiu-jitsu and nobody had seen jiu-jitsu before. You just find this big hole in your game, right? So I realized there's a hole in my fitness game, but they lay us down at the end. And at the end, the guy goes, yeah, just lay here for as long as you like, right? And I'm like, okay, well, I was Forrest Gumping the experience because that's how I learn anything. You probably felt this when you were kind of coaching me a little bit in the gym. I don't care what I know. The moment somebody goes to coach me now, I'm ready. I'll just Forrest Gump it. I don't, So I'm Forrest Gumping this class, and he tells me to lie down. So I do everything he asked me to do to the T. And then, which was just lay there until you want to get up. And then without even knowing what happened, I had this insane, what I'll call mystical experience. And I won't go too much into it, but I thought the experience lasted 5 minutes. It lasted 9 hours. My whole perception of time was completely skewed, so much so that I thought I had like a fucking brain tumor or something. But it felt so amazing what it was. It was so, I can't even describe it to you. It's like, how do you describe peanut butter to a person who had never tasted peanut butter?
Yeah.
So I'm not even going to try to describe it, but just something happened to me that was so unexplainable that I thought maybe I had a brain tumor or something. But I had no health insurance. I had nothing like that, so I wasn't going to go. And then to the doctor to get myself checked out. Anyhow, somehow, a little bit later, I started to associate it with yoga. And so I started going to all these yoga classes, trying to figure out like if this was it. And I knew that most of the people who taught yoga were like kind of full of shit because they didn't even understand basic anatomy.
Yep.
But I kept going because I knew something was there. And going aside from the techniques.
Did you bang any of the chicks?
No, actually, no, I didn't. Because I wanted to go and try to figure my shit out. But what I discovered, and like as I look back through my life, one of the core themes of my life has been to enter what I call I heard an ultra marathon runner say it. They called it the pain cave, and I was like, that's it. That's where I go. I go to the pain cave, and I used to go to the pain cave to hide from my emotional pain. And then yoga started taking me to the pain cave to draw my emotional pain out so I could fucking look at it. Rather than hiding from what was actually going on within me, I was now forcibly putting myself into pain directly so I could draw out the misery within my system and look at it and then attempt to retrain a new pattern. And so this process, to really succeed at this, though, I had to become obsessed. Like, I had to become obsessed with understanding yoga in order to map my human system. Because the pain internally was so great, and I had walled off my heart so deep, and there was so much nastiness in my system that it was an incredibly painful process. And that's why I have a lotus flower actually tattooed onto my arm, because the lotus flower is one of the few flowers in the world that only grows out of filth. And it represents the principle of turning filth into fragrance. That the harder our life has been on us, the sooner we can become wise if we know how to look. That buried within our deepest pain is our greatest possibility for our deepest pleasantness. I know joy so intensely because I know misery so intensely. Does that make sense?
Yep, absolutely it does.
And so, like at the beginning of this podcast, when I talk about the emotional bodybuilding, like this isn't hairy-fairy, woo-woo-y, wacky fucking bullshit. Like this is real, down and dirty. Get into the fucking depth of your soul and don't be a little bitch and look at your fucking shit and actually do something about it so that you can put an end to the shit that's been cursing your family and you don't pass that shit on to your kids or anybody else in the world. And so then I started to set a standard for myself that I would love people. And it was a practice, and it's been a practice, but it starts, the precursor to loving people is loving yourself, because I didn't realize this, but I can't love anybody to any depth that I can't love myself. And there were so many parts of myself that I didn't know how to love because I didn't want to love them because they were ugly. I had to admit to myself that, well, yeah, there are parts of you that are at that time there are parts of you that are quite cowardice. There are parts of you that is ashamed. There is parts of you that feels guilty. There's parts of you that knows where you lie to yourself, where you break promises to yourself, where you speak badly about yourself in the quiet spaces of your own mind. And I had to admit that shit to myself. But when you're just sitting there, like when you're around in your house and you're fucking distracted out here all the time playing the gamify game, yeah, dude, how do I get the hottest girl? How do I get the nicest car? Because if I can get a hot girl in a nice car, I can make y'all fucking think everything in my life is whoop-de-whoop. But wait till the fucking door's shut. None of you are around. It's just me by myself with my own thoughts.
Yep.
You know?
Yep.
And so I was like caught at that time, and it, I knew that there was no fucking way out if I continued to play the gamify game. Especially after one of the things that I thought was really truly going to make me happy, that I was like, this will do it. Once I get a Matt BURZACOTT body, then I'm finally going to get a woman that won't abandon me. She'll see my value and she'll want to stay with me. And because I'm so sexy and I'm so fit, she'll overlook all of the other problems in my life. And she'll see me as being a work in progress, somebody she's willing to invest in. And then we can build a family together. And then I got the fucking six-pack and I got the body. You've seen the pictures. And I couldn't even, you see my face in that mirror? You see my face? It's full of pain. Can't even fucking look at myself. Because all I see is my inner image at that time. And that's why I say I don't really care if somebody calls it yoga. That's not important to me. It's not important to me at all. I don't care where it came from. What I know for a fact is that it gave me methods to use my system to walk myself into my pain, not away from it, not a workaround, not a hide. And then all of a sudden I was like, holy fuck, everything that I'm doing can be yoga. Because it has to do with drawing out of myself my own limitations. And then working on myself, actually. And so I went to work. And then I decided from that moment, I made the commitment to myself that I was going to work until I set myself free. And then I went into it. And just being with myself for long periods of time. Because if you're alone and you're miserable, then you're in bad company. And I needed to go to work at building myself to be in good company so that when I was out here, I had actually something of value to offer to the world. Because if I can offer something of value to the world, then and I offer a genuine fragrance, then I don't even have to open doors. Doors open for me because people want to be around you when you're a genuinely like caring and kind person. So when people ask me, how it is now that I'm capable of being so joyful. I tell them it's not that I'm incapable of any other emotion. It's that I've committed myself to a level of pleasantness that I've kept at my standard. And I have this whole list of tools where I visit the pain cave every day. And the pain cave shows up for me in a number of different ways. But I go there. I go there every day, consciously, intentionally, with the desire to look at myself with honest eyes without trying to code anything one way or the other. And I try to look, and I don't try, I do. I look at myself with where I'm at here today, and I go, okay, what do I need to do to change in here so that everything out here changes?
And you know what? I think it's very hard to interject on you when you're on a
good.
flow.
Yeah.
No. I'm not saying that so that you can tell me that. I'm just telling you that listening to, I don't know how long that just was. What, an hour?
Yeah.
Of you just going? That was incredible. Genuinely, that was incredible. To hear your full story that way. So I want you to know that.
Thank you.
Was extremely well articulated, and you told a full tapestry of story.
Yeah.
And tied together so many pieces that to somebody that wouldn't have had the time and went through the effort and went through all the pain that you have and then found your way through, if you weren't the genuine article for what you're speaking on in the portion of the podcast that we recorded prior to this, which I'm going to suggest our masterful film editor, yeah, I believe that this piece should go first. Because there is not a human being alive that is going to hear all of what you just said and then think that a word that came out of your mouth today was anything less than completely 100% genuine to your truth and the truth that you see in the world. There's not a single fake part about you. And I think the entire world watching and listening to this is going to know that from hearing that. That was genuinely an extremely moving experience to hear you talk. That was incredible.
Well, I just want to thank you guys for giving me the opportunity to come on, and for giving me this opportunity to speak with you and to speak with your audience. My intention is to allow the truth to unify us and to set us free, all of us together, my intention with my life is an offering to humanity. People are now my objects of devotion. And in yoga culture, they call those your Ishta Devatas. People are my objects of devotion. And so I'm devoted to humanity. My life is a gift to them. And being here and having this opportunity, it is my wish, it is my hope, it is my intention that for anybody listening out there who is facing the dark night of their own heart, who feels hopeless, who feels like there's no tomorrow, who feels that there's no sunlight that's going to be possible, I hope that in hearing my story that you'll know that this isn't the end for you, that there is something beautiful for you beyond your imagination. There are people like me and countless others that are ready and eager to help you and help guide you and offer you the support and the love and the care that you need so that you can strengthen yourself and build yourself and live a beautiful life inside and out in every way possible.
And I think that, for me speaking more directly to the audience here, everything that you've talked about today, specifically everything that you've just tied together right there with that final statement, the reason why we have you on the show is because the both of us resonate so deeply with what you have to say, because we can recognize a place filled with pain. And so many bodybuilders specifically identify with that to such a degree that pain is the only type of existence that they understand, and identify to that's the all of their life. And we fight to chase the purpose of finding more pain. And in going through that for so much time, thinking that there's going to be this magical end goal, like you looking at Matt and thinking this is Shangri-La, trying to get there, try to be exactly like him, as if that destination was going to bring you the joy that you couldn't find. And everything that you said with your story adds up to say to everyone else that's listening to it, there was no way in hell that that was going to be the case. Everything that you had to go through, there was zero chance that that pursuit towards that specific goal was going to get you that.
100%.
And for people that are listening that are specifically within bodybuilding, that is something that needs to be said from like the highest rooftop and screamed incessantly down to them so that they can understand. Because that's the lie that's sold to everyone. And it's the fault of commercialism. It's the fault of the social construct of the sport itself. And everything around, like, just people's self-worth in general being so tied to materialistic things. And in this common culture that we have in fitness and bodybuilding more specifically, the human body is more of a commodity and a product than it is an expression of people's actual identity. And with that dissociation, it becomes something to be achieved and aspired to, not for your own development, but at the expense of your own development in every other way. And that ends up landing people that pursue bodybuilding trying to get to that Shangri-La in nowhere's land. And then they're sad and unfulfilled, and all they have left is that sad, tortured face in the picture of their best, fittest form that never really fulfilled them in the first place. And that's a place that we all land at one point if they don't address the internal things. And one of the things that we had talked about with intermission before getting back to talking about your story was the importance of balance, right?
Yeah.
And this is the last thing that I want to cover here, because I think this is the easiest way for us to get, like, grab the attention and shake the people that listen to this. Because your story is enough to shake people awake. Absolutely. But for some people that may not be at the place emotionally for them to impose your story into their life and make parallels to understand how these same ideas might apply into them, in bodybuilding we have such a strong drive towards pain. And that is what people identify with, and we call people that look for balance weak, and like they don't even care about the goal of bodybuilding. As if there is only you have balance and you suck, or you have no balance and that's the way you become great. And it's such a ridiculous binary that doesn't need to exist, because it paints anyone that looks, because this is how I see it, and this is my own experience personally, is that when I have been the most unbalanced is when I have been the most unstable. And although maybe at those times going towards one specific goal was more achievable because everything else was out of my view, there is a limited amount of time that you could do that for. And when that limit comes, you're standing there running on fumes and you don't know where the next drive will come. And you feel like you're at a dead end and there's nothing you can do. And the only thing that people in bodybuilding know how to do when they land there is, what do you think you're going to do? Pump some more gas in there and go. And that's it. There's no, well, why do you feel this way? Why do you feel the need to dig and suffer and live in pain for the sake of pain? Not living in pain for the sake of something worthwhile to bring something more out of you? Because that's not how we see it. It's, you can only achieve your goal if you suffer to the supreme degree that is physically possible to do so. And that is not the way that we need to do this. We've talked about this in specific bodybuilding terms for just how you go about prep, how you go about the lifestyle. Because it doesn't need to be that everything that you do is geared towards making things as insufferable as it needs to be. There's a time and there's a place. But the entirety of your existence should not be that of just struggling one foot in front of the other just to do the things that you tell yourself that you love. Because that's not doing anything in service of the love of the thing you do. That is just attaching to something that fills the hole that you have, where that suffering is the only thing you identify with, which is the same as what you talked about with your experience. Keep on finding yourself in those situations where that was your only way. The only understanding you had was the external suffering that made you hurt. And eventually you came to the place where you knew that pain from the outside in made the rot happen from the inside out. and everything on the outside of you was now an enemy.
Yes.
And people in bodybuilding live that life. Almost that's the way that they feel that they have to. Because socially, that's how you're formed into bodybuilding. You identify with each other as a brotherhood of pain. And it doesn't have to be that way. And you made a reference even earlier in the show, which may now be later in the show, that you would like to see and you miss seeing the camaraderie and people genuinely being happy with doing the process. How good it would be and how great the whole sport would be if people could actually go about it and want to be interacting with one another, genuinely pushing each other, being happy to do it, expressing their love of the thing by just doing it well, instead of becoming further and further individualized and atomized away from one another, and everyone else is an enemy. And it's the gym floor is a war zone. The stage is a war zone. It's not people that understand and do the same thing for the same common goal that are coming together to do it in service of the thing that they call an art form. It's not. It's going to war. It's not how it needs to be. Balance is not the death of greatness. At some point, if you do not have balance in the right ways, which is being able to address and attend to all of the suffering that's necessary for living life and making it to a goal that you have set for yourself, especially if it's a high goal. If it's a high target, you're going to have to suffer to get there.
100%.
But that's choice. You need to put yourself through that suffering to get there. Resenting that suffering gets you nowhere. And we identify as resenting that suffering and then digging through it anyway because we're not so weak that we'll give it up. And that balance is never struck. And that is that gray area between either having balance and trying to spend so much time on self-care and this everything else under the sun that becomes the woo-woo arguments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That people hate listening to. It's like, well, if I'm going to be great at something, I just need to give it all. Yeah, you do.
Yep.
Yes, you do. But that doesn't mean that at that same time for you to be unbalanced enough for you to get there. It's an imbalance of effort. It's tilting your intention towards realizing something. That is what being unbalanced for bodybuilding is. What it should be. It's not being unbalanced where literally every other aspect of your entire life be damned. And everyone else in your life be damned. The feelings of everyone around you be damned. You're not the only thing that matters. And that one aspect of one goal that is a gamified, caricatured thing that we do as a sport is not the only thing that matters. Because we're all human beings first. And everything else, if nothing else is balanced and being taken care of, the one thing you do care about will collapse in front of your eyes. And after that, you have nothing. And that is how we tie this off so the bodybuilding viewers will actually walk away from this to get something from it. Matt, you have seen way too many people fall down that hole. You almost did.
Yeah.
You lived a long time in that hole.
Yeah.
And now you can probably make some final remarks on exactly what you'd like to see come from having this conversation happen on this podcast.
I mean, I'm just, I'm happy that you're here. And I mean, how cool is it that, after telling that whole story, how cool is it for you that here you're helping me now?
Oh man,
And
yeah, it's surreal.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where these are the kind of experiences that also give me this, what I feel to be a lesson that sometimes when we're going through experiences, we don't know why we're going through them at the time. Mm-hmm. And because we can't see the full picture as to how it's all going to play out in the long term. Mm-hmm. But I don't think I would be here today with you in this capacity, or I would have the skill or ability to be able to be of service to you in this fashion if it wasn't for the exact journey that I went through. Mm-hmm. So it is very surreal, and also I just feel so full with gratitude, so full of thankfulness. I just there's the feelings are usually hard to articulate, but the strength of the intensity of them is very, very significant in my own heart.
And you did a great job.
Yeah.
You did a fantastic job.
Did a fantastic job.
Well, thank you. I really just wanted to come on and have a real honest conversation with you guys. I've spent a long time alone in my own little, in my own hole in that obsessive pursuit.
Yep.
Because to be truly masterful at something, you have to consciously suck at a lot of other things.
Yep.
And through my processes, one of the things I guess I'm trying to say is that you can endure pain pleasantly.
Mm-hmm.
And if we have the courage to look into our heart and understand why we're enduring pain miserably and examine that and do the hard and difficult work, then we could save some lives in a really big way. And not only could we save some lives, but we could also see this sport that we love, because at the core of this, I'm a bodybuilding super fan.
Mm-hmm.
And I maybe not a super fan as some other folks, but like I really do love the sport, and I admire what you guys do, and I resonate and I connect with every one of the audience members that goes into the gym day in and day out and is doing the work to try to get through life and endure what they're going through in pursuit of this. And I would just love to see what they would do when they can do all of the hard things that you got to do, because you can't have this without enduring the hardship.
Yep.
But how much further might you go if you could endure it pleasantly? Because I think about you, Matt, and I think about what you experienced and how amazing of a bodybuilding you are and were, and knowing where you were internally and what you were enduring through all of that, and yet you were still able to do all of that.
Yeah.
So now imagine if there wasn't an e-brake on you, essentially.
Yeah. Well, that's why you're here, man.
Thank you, brother.
Right.
I appreciate you.
So I appreciate you, man. Thank you so much for coming down.
Oh, you're so welcome. This was a dream for me. Getting to be with you men in this fashion has filled my heart and my cup so full, and I'm so inspired by you both. And you guys have given me so much in the week that I've been here, even prior to the podcast here. Getting to be with you guys in the gym and getting to see what you do and getting to just interact with you guys in everyday life. This will be a treasure of a memory for me for the rest of my life. And I'm truly grateful from the bottom of my heart. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well,
Thank you.
that was Mathew Koder. And we're out.